right, again, thank you for joining us for the Power of Positive Feedback with Claudia St. John. And many of you attended when we had another program with her back in the summer, as well as some of you attended through the IAMB Young Agent Conference last week. So you're very familiar with Claudia. Claudia is the founder and CEO of the Workplace Advisors, and she brings a unique perspective to all of these topics, being that she's a woman. And she just truly gets it. So I'm going to turn it over to you and go for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jess, and thank you, everybody. I'm reading through the chats. It's so great to see some of you again, and I'm just absolutely delighted that you all are here. And I'm really excited about this presentation. I think this presentation resonates for us in a lot of different ways. And the title of the presentation is The Power of Positive Feedback. So I'm going to talk about the power of positive feedback because it truly is a transformational tool, not only at work, but also in our personal lives. So I want to start by saying being able and practiced and experienced in giving positive feedback is an interpersonal communication tool that will work well for all of us always. It definitely works well at work, but it also is something that when I really learned about it and really understood more sort of how we respond to feedback and the importance of that feedback, it has been incredibly important in my personal relationships with my family, with my children. So my hope is that I'm going to give you just another tool for your toolbox in which to get along with others and to be great leaders and all that entails. So I'm going to get right in it. The first thing I want to tell you is that I did put in the chat at the very, very top of the chat, and I know a lot of you have chatted, so there's a lot in there now, a book by Richard Williams. And so a lot of where I get inspiration about positive feedback in particular is from this book. It's Tell Me How I'm Doing, a fable about the importance of giving feedback. So that's in there. You can find it on Amazon.com. I didn't write the book, and I unfortunately have no relationship with the person who wrote this book, but it's a great book. So a lot of what I will talk about comes from that. So do have an opportunity, if you can, just to pull that out of the chat if you want to learn more about it. I think the first thing I want to say is that we know that in this day and age that it is very, very hard to maintain positive relationships at work. And we know just leading up to the election from yesterday that the rate of incivility at work was really astronomically high. And it really has been even since COVID. I think a lot of us are under stress, a lot of us are under pressure, and people tend to be a little bit short. So I'm not talking about civility today, but what I am talking about are interpersonal relationships and how they can be affected by the way we approach them. We know for the rest of this decade and for the rest of this century that we are going to have fewer and fewer workers available to fill the jobs that we need to have filled. This is entirely a function of our low birth rate over the years, the fact that we have a smaller generation, Generation Z, entering the workplace compared to the baby boomers who are heading out of the workplace. I myself am a Gen X, and I will tell you it makes no difference to anybody because we are the smallest of all the generations in the workforce right now and have been for a long time. So what we know is that there are going to be fewer and fewer people out there in which to do the work that we have to have done. What we know in most of the businesses that we work with, and we work in a wide variety of industries, a lot in the insurance space, but also in automotive, in manufacturing, in printing, and in pension benefit administration and promotional products. We know that the weakest link in all of our organizations is our supervisors and managers. Because what we also know is that those folks who get promoted into those roles, supervising others, leading others, oftentimes are promoted because they're very good at doing the thing, doing whatever is needed to be done at the workplace, but they're not always given the tools and the strategies in order to communicate effectively, to communicate with empathy, to communicate well with others. And so this is one of those foundational things. I know that I got to see some of you last week at IAMB talking about DISC behavioral styles and understanding different behavioral styles and how we communicate. This follows nicely with that because what we're talking about is feedback. And our weakest link are the people that sit between the workers who are doing all of the work and leaders who are doing all of the work. And we know this has been an age-old truth for as long as I've been in the workplace, which is longer than I'd like to share. That people don't quit their jobs, they quit their direct managers and supervisors. So what I want to talk about today is something that's going to help you as a direct supervisor, as a direct manager, be more effective. And the one thing that we know that will make you more effective is in giving feedback. Feedback is fundamental. We all need it. And what we know is that a lot of times the people that we give feedback to are the ones that are maybe not thriving, the ones that are needing more corrective behavior, needing more guidance in how to do the job or interact with carriers or with the insured clients that you all have. What we also know is that the people that are really doing well also want feedback. Those of you who are on this call right now are probably rock stars, right? You're doing a lot to improve yourself. You're doing a lot to develop the tools to be successful as women in the workplace. And we're all trying to figure out how can we be better. And those of us who have been doing this for many, many years, we can always be better. But what we know is that people who are doing really well in their jobs may not be getting feedback because you're not doing anything wrong. But we're the ones that get burned out because we're not getting feedback, because we're not getting our buckets filled. So a moment about buckets. So there is a wonderful story in this book that I recommend to you, the fable about giving feedback. And that is that we all have our self-esteem. We all carry it around in a bucket. And that self-esteem can be filled through many things, through our relationships, through our friendships, through our loved ones, through the interactions that we have at work with others. But we all of us have some level of insecurity. All of us have something that's sort of taking all of that esteem, all of that motivation and draining it out. And we know over the past few years, burnout is a real serious issue. I gave a webinar to this group on burnout over the summer, that esteem that we feel either through ourselves or through those around us can flood out. And in the workplace in particular, we all have holes in our buckets. Those holes might be there as a result of something that happened to us at home. We had an argument, we had a difficult situation, or maybe we are the victims of our own self-dialogue. Maybe we are the victims of our own inner voice and inner narrative that may not be as kind to us as we want it to be. And so when little things happen, they punch a hole in our buckets. And sometimes those buckets have little holes that are draining out a little bit at a time. And sometimes those buckets have gaping holes where we are running on empty, where we don't think that we're doing a good job, we're not satisfying our clients or the expectations that others or we have for ourselves. And the way that we fill that bucket back up is by giving more feedback. The more feedback we give people, the more able they are to learn how to do better, to recognize the things that are going well. And positive feedback, that's basically saying to somebody, you know what, you're doing exactly what we asked you to do in a way that is above and beyond what we're asking of you. That really matters, and thank you. When we get that kind of feedback, it fills our buckets. Now, some people have buckets that are half full. Some people have buckets that are overfilling, or half empty. It depends on who we are. But we all know that we need to fill those buckets. So I'm gonna get off of this analogy, but I am going to talk about the different types of feedback, because feedback comes in many forms. The feedback that I want you to focus on the most today is positive feedback. Positive feedback is a feedback that is designed to create a repetition in behavior. And I think about things like when my children were little, they were slobs. I mean, they kind of still are. But when I would ask them to do something and they did it, and I was like, well, good, thank you. I asked you and you did it. It wasn't like that stuck. But if I gushed over them and said, look at how you did that. Look at how you cleaned up your room. Look at how you put away the dishes, whatever it was, the next day, they would do it again. So positive feedback is really designed to capture somebody doing something well. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. And it's designed to create a repetition, to get them to repeat that behavior that garnered your positive feedback in the first place. So the first type of feedback is positive. The second type of feedback is probably what we're most familiar with. This is corrective feedback. This is when people show up and we need to have conversations with them about time or attendance or attire or what they're doing or how they're doing it. It's sort of the course correction necessary to, make sure that they are doing things the way that you want them to do it, and maybe they're not quite accomplishing that. So corrective behavior, corrective feedback is designed to create a behavior change. The third type of feedback, which until I really started listening to myself, I realized this is probably where I spent most of my time, was in insignificant feedback. That's like that atta girl, atta boy, great job. Thanks. You did a great job. Hey, that was good. That was good. Thanks for that. It matters because it's saying something positive, which can fill a bucket a little bit, but it's not specific. And it's just sort of more like a thank you than it is actual feedback. And I realized once I really started thinking about this, that most of the feedback that I was giving was really in the form of insignificant. It was just sort of minimal, like great job, but it didn't move anybody and it didn't really fill many buckets. The last part of feedback that I hope you don't have, and I know we've all experienced, that is abusive. Abusive feedback is basically saying like, well, that did us no good, and you really blew that one, or what were you thinking when you did that? It's a form of reprimand. It doesn't breed a repetition of positive behavior. It doesn't even change behavior. It goes beyond minimal into contempt, where people just think, you know what, I don't care about you, and I actually don't care about making things better for you, because all you're doing is at best not filling my bucket, but at worst you're actually creating huge holes in my bucket. So what I want to do is say, I'm going to focus on these two top behaviors, these two top levels of feedback, because really insignificant feedback doesn't really do much. It just doesn't move the needle in any meaningful way. And abusive feedback should just not be allowed at all. And if you're seeing abusive feedback in the workplace, that's the sort of thing that really can kill a culture, can kill esteem, and should be addressed seriously if you see it happening. Um, I love giving language to things. And so now that you have a language for different types of feedback, my hope is that you will see it more readily in your workplace and in your personal lives, and remind yourself, yeah, we have to do course corrections and some corrective behavior from time to time, but what we really want to do is lean into that positive feedback. So I want to take a moment and talk about positive feedback. So when we talk about positive feedback, what we're saying is, I am acknowledging you doing something that I am expecting you to do in the first place, and I'm taking a minute to say thank you, and I'm telling you how that matters to you. When I first started delivering this presentation, and it was, I don't know, many years ago, I would oftentimes be delivering this, oftentimes in that day and age, to a room full of businessmen. And the response I got often was this sort of like people sitting in the back, usually men sitting in the back, saying, wait a minute, you want me to go around and like say thank you to everybody that I'm paying them to do this work for? I'm paying them to do this. So now I have to go around and give them like a gold star and a happy face. Is that what you're suggesting? And the answer is yes. That is exactly what I'm suggesting. Because if you think people are going to stay working with you or being in relationship with you because you pay them, life is too short. And we know that work-life balance means we all know we can all work somewhere else and get more money. In this day and age, that is a reality. What keeps us engaged, what keeps us working the way that we're working with the people that we're working with, are relationships and care and consideration. So what positive feedback really is, in its essence, is the act of saying, thank you for what you're doing here. It matters a great deal, and we appreciate all that you do. Please keep up the good work. So when we talk about positive feedback, there really are basically 4 steps to it. The first step is to recognize the specific behavior. I saw you have that conversation with that client about the fact that their premiums are going up, or that we're having difficulty insuring whatever it is that you need to insure in this hard market. You all are having a lot of very difficult conversations right now. This is a hard work environment for all of you. So the first thing is to describe somebody doing something well. I saw you on that conversation. I saw that you mailed out those renewals. I saw how you handled that situation. I saw how you emptied the trash. I saw how you made an extra pot of coffee for other people in the office. So the first thing is specifically saying, I saw you do this thing, and being specific about what that thing is. The second is saying, because you did that. So the consequences of that behavior when you were talking to that client is that they know you care about them. They know that you understand that this is difficult, that these price increases are going to be hard to bear, that they're going to stretch budgets, that you understand that. So you understand, you're showing empathy. So when I hear you talking to that customer, you are showing them that we care and that we're on their side. Or when you're filling the coffee pot, it shows that you care and that you care about the people that you work with. The third step is to tell them how you feel about it. That makes me proud. That makes me happy. That makes me feel so enriched to know that I work in a workplace where people care about each other, or where people take their jobs so seriously that they go above and beyond, which is what you just did. And then I feel that way because it makes me know that we are doing the best for our clients and for our peers. So it's a very, it's really a formula, but it's one that works. You describe the situation, you tell them what the consequences of that are, you tell them how you feel about it and why you feel that way. Those are the feelings, those are the steps toward giving positive feedback. I have over the years been asked, what about, you know, Sylvia, who is unpleasant and doesn't do anything positive? There's literally nothing positive I can find about that person. The first question I would ask you is, why is that person working with you? If there is literally somebody who cannot say anything positive about, well, then maybe you should think about some of the choices that you're making. Or if it's in your personal life, there's nothing positive I can say about this person in my life. Well, maybe we need to think about how to minimize that person. But in the end, there's always something. There's always something positive you can say about somebody. The way they picked up a piece of garbage in the hallway, the way they responded to a concern that another employee had. And I'll give a personal anecdote about that. I hope none of you are in this ballpark with me, but I have been single for about 8 years. And during that time, I've had the opportunity to do some online dating. I don't recommend it. It's a pretty horrible thing. And you can go through those experiences where you're like, oh my God, there's nothing good. There's nothing good out there. There's nothing good out there. It's awful. And it can be depressing and it can be upsetting. And I started the practice of, with every person that I did not swipe right on, acknowledging something positive about them. They must be very proud of that fish that they just caught. Or, look, I really like that he has that motorcycle. That must make him very happy. And all the other things that were out there that didn't match my profile. But just acknowledging something positive about a behavior and being able to comment on it is really all that it takes. And you will find when you do that, it shifts your own mindset from one of disappointment or frustration to one of observing positive things. It creates a sense of positivity even in those of us who don't identify as naturally positive people, those of us who maybe our constitutions are glass or bucket half full. When we start acknowledging and seeing the positive in others, it makes us feel better. And there are very real consequences to this as well. So there's a thing called a 10 penny challenge, and I would encourage you to think about it. And I know that these are quarters and they are not pennies, but I could not find a good image of pennies. So, inflation, be that what it is. But there was a story, and it's a true story about an Alamo car rental agency. This was in a southern state that, and in a very impoverished and economically depressed area of that state. And it had been underperforming for years. And all of a sudden, it started performing better. It started getting better customer reviews. It stopped having so much employee turnover. It started really shining within the region in which it included, and it actually went to the very top of the Alamo car rental chain. And so they started investigating what was changing, because like customer feedback was good. They were getting more responses. They were getting more repeat customers. And again, employee satisfaction was through the roof. It turned out that this manager of this one region, of this one Alamo car rental agency, he had with him what he called his 10 penny challenge. Every morning, he put 10 pennies in his left-hand pocket. And throughout the day, he would stop and give positive feedback to literally everybody that he came into contact with. And at the end of the day, if there were any pennies, and so he would say something positive, hey, Sue, thanks for coming in early. I really appreciate that. That means I can rely on you. And that means that we're going to be able to satisfy our customers. And I'm really grateful for you. Then he would take that penny and put it in his right pocket. And then he would do that over time. And at the end of the day, if he didn't have any pennies in his right pocket when he had started out in the right pocket, he knew he was doing his job. That was the only thing he changed. All he did was give positive feedback, the power of positive feedback. Each and every one of you can do this. Each and every one of you can find 10 pennies. And you may think like, there's only 3 people that I work with in my office, or I work remotely by myself. How am I ever going to get rid of these pennies? I don't care. Start with 4 and see how it transforms you. See how it transforms the people that you work with. It is by its nature transformative. And when I've worked with business leaders, one of the things I've always recommended that they do is put on their calendars, until they get used to it, until it becomes just absolutely natural to them, put on the calendar the time when you're going to get up and walk around and give some positive feedback to your employees. And for those of you who work remotely, yes, this can happen as well. If people are ahead of time on the work that they have to do, if you get feedback from a customer that they were satisfied, if you hear that you have more repeat customers, or if you see that the teams that they are leading are engaged and happy, there is always opportunity to give positive feedback. And if it's something you're learning, whenever we learn new things, right? It takes us how many days? 30 days to create a new habit. Put it on your calendar, make it a habit, and you will see how this transforms you. You will see the power of positive feedback. And I tell you this because I've walked this walk myself, and it absolutely changes not only your personal relationships, but your business ones as well. Unfortunately, we can't only give positive feedback. Unfortunately, we do from time to time have to give corrective feedback. What I will start by saying is you start your corrective feedback with a positive, and you end your corrective feedback with a positive. We call that the sandwich method. And everybody's like, whenever I get that first piece of good positive feedback, I know there's going to be something in the middle. Yes, people do recognize and fear that corrective feedback, but I want to give you some steps if you have to give corrective feedback for how to do that. So we start by preparing with them. Ask them, I would love to have a conversation with you about how that meeting went. Do you have time now? Is this a good time? Make sure you're doing it at a time that is convenient, not just for you, but for them. Because if you both enter into this conversation, or if either of you enter into this conversation where you are not prepared emotionally for it, prepared to hear and receive that feedback, because sometimes we don't want feedback. And I've actually had to say from time to time, I know you need to give me feedback. I need to take a minute until I'm ready to receive that feedback with an open mind and an open heart, because I might not be emotionally ready for that. Or I might say, I'm ready to give some feedback. Are you ready to receive it? And if they say, not really, then ask them when. Make sure that you prepared for that conversation so that they are not blindsided and you're not finding them in an emotional state. Because when you find them in an emotional state, it doesn't go well. And I'll explain why. Ask for their assessment about how things are going. Ask for their assessment about the thing that you're finding the need to talk to them about correcting. And then you want to listen to them. We do not spend enough time listening to alternative perspectives. And what you might find in those alternative perspectives is a different perspective altogether, or maybe a barrier that somebody is facing that's making it difficult for them to satisfy your expectations. But listening with an open heart, and by an open heart, I mean setting aside your preconceived notions in order to hear what their perspective is. Try to listen with empathy. Then deliver the feedback and engage in dialogue about it. Here's how things are not working the way we'd like to. What can we do to improve it? What do you need from me? How can I help you? What do you need from others? Why are we not accomplishing this the way that we need to? Set new expectations and then define the next steps and document. Those are really the steps. Now I have 6 steps. I threw document there on the end because define and document is really sort of part and parcel of the same thing. What I will tell you, managers do not do enough. They have the difficult conversations, but they don't document them. It drives me crazy. They don't document them because they're eternal optimists and because they think it's going to fix the situation. They don't document them because they don't know what they're going to use that documentation for. They don't, they're not, they don't want to be, they don't want to write it up. And it doesn't have to be something that the person you're talking with even sees. It's just making a note. I had this conversation with them about this. And then you can go back afterward and say, hey, we had that conversation a month ago and things are going really well. That gives you an opportunity to give positive feedback. But documenting is one of the critical things where an HR company, and far too often, we hear from people saying things like, what we need to get rid of this person, or we need to put this person on a PIP. And I'll say, let me see your documentation. They never have it. So do yourself a favor. Just write it down. Nobody has to look at it. Nobody has to sign it. It's for your reference for if you do need it in the future. When you're giving corrective feedback, I have some do's and I have some don'ts. So do prioritize the feedback. So if you have 2 or 3 things that you really want to talk with them about, talk about the most important ones. Don't end up with a whole laundry list. Deliver it as close to the actual event as possible. Don't wait for a quarterly check-in or performance review. Ask questions, seek their perspective, find out how they're feeling about things. There may be things that could be structured or done better that you didn't know because you weren't in the position of having to do those things. Separate your positive and your constructive feedback and be very clear about it. I want you to hear me say this. You are doing such a great job about this. This is the corrective stuff, and this is the other stuff that you're doing very well. So you want to separate them. You don't want them to blend in, because if you blend them together, then they won't have meaning. And you want to try to create a balance. You want to have as much positive as constructive as you, or corrective as you have to give them. So if there's a big correction you have to give them, try to have as much positive as possible. And of course, document the conversation. Please do not overload it with a laundry list of concerns. What we do is we wait and wait and wait and wait and wait until we have to deal with something. And then we throw all of the stuff at them. So if we're giving a little bit of constructive along the way, then it's tolerated, and we're not just beating them up. Because when we overload with the laundry list, that quickly can become abusive if it's just blows them out of the water. Don't wait until the incident becomes hazy, or don't wait until the incident becomes such a big deal in your mind that you are mad about it or you have negative emotions around it, because that again can take us toward abusive feedback. Don't have a one-sided conversation. We all have to listen more. And people who feel like they are heard, even if they are not agreed with, at least they feel that they are heard and they're happy and they're engaged. If all they're doing is getting it in the face and they're not being heard, they will not stay with you, because that is exhausting. Here is a big tip. Please write this down. I want you to stop using the word but, or however, or yet. I don't want you to use these words, because when you use the word but, it negates everything that came before it. So for example, I heard you having that wonderful conversation and you did a really great job listening to them and understanding their concerns. But the way that you ended that conversation, you gave them an estimate that we're not going to be able to satisfy. When you say but, then all of a sudden, everything that you said that was positive goes away. It evaporates. It becomes, oh, you just did the sandwich thing on me. But when you use the word and, it gives us a whole new opportunity to create positive conversations. I heard you have the conversation with that client. You did such a great job. And the way you wrapped it up with the quote was as it should have been. And you'll be more successful if you try doing it this way next time. So you can start your corrective conversations with and. And what it does, instead of saying, you've done a great job, but it's you've done a great job and you'll be even better if you do these things. And is such a powerful, powerful word. I lean into it. My friends and family all joke because they'll say, I really don't like that restaurant. And if you want to go there, it's okay. And it creates a big laugh, but it also, it just takes away the negativity. So focus on the word and don't use the word but and however. Don't leave employees feeling beat up. If you feel like they're feeling beat up, check in with them, give them more positive feedback, give them as much positive feedback as you can to fill the bucket that you just punched a big hole in. Don't assume the problem is resolved forever. This is why we document things. We always want to assume, well, we've had that hard conversation, we don't have to deal with it anymore. Don't assume that. Sometimes we have to have critical conversation, or we have to have corrective conversations that become critical. So these are the same thing as corrective conversations, but the stakes are a lot higher. So a critical conversation, it's going to be a critical conversation when opinions are varied, right? That we're not going to be able to see agreement on this thing. The stakes matter and emotions are high. If the stakes don't matter, it's not a critical conversation. We're not going to use this coffee. We're going to go to a different coffee brand. Opinions may vary on that, but emotions don't. It's not, the stakes are not high. But when you have all three of these together, you're having a critical conversation. And you will also know you're having a critical conversation if you feel it in your stomach. If you feel that pit in your stomach, because there are physiological and emotional components to having critical conversations that we need to pay attention to. So if you feel like your stomach is upset, or your palms are sweaty, or you're feeling anxious about it, or you're trying to avoid it altogether, that is a critical conversation. If you feel unsafe, like I don't want to have this conversation, I want to get out of this conversation. If you're feeling any of these things, it means that your fight or flight is kicking in. That's an emotional response, and you cannot have a conversation in an emotional state. And here's why. When you are in a good emotional state, your higher cortex is thinking, you're thinking about things, you're processing things, all of the sensations that you're experiencing in your life, they come up through your brainstem into your brain, right? And it all goes up there, and we can think rationally. But when we're in an emotional state, what happens is the amygdala, which is that tiny little prehistoric part of our brain, it is responsible for our emotions. And that has one function. It floods our body with hormones. And those hormones create a fight, flight, freeze response. So when that amygdala is engaged, the higher cortex is disabled. And when the higher cortex is disabled, we start thinking about things that are wrong. We start getting defensive. We want to flee or we want to fight. Everybody's out to get us. That happens when it's a critical conversation. And so you need to recognize in yourself if you are in a critical state. And I like to use the term that this is really, we get red. Emotional intelligence is not having emotions. Emotional intelligence is having emotions, recognizing that we have emotions, and then moving through them as quickly as we can. So the emotional component of critical conversations is first recognizing if we're red, because if we're red, we do not want to have that conversation. Also recognize if they are red, because if they are red, you need to set up some time for them to process their emotions to create a safe space. The other thing I want to remind us all of is we are all telling ourselves stories all day long. There's a narrative going on in our head, and we're telling ourselves stories about other people. But behavioral science tells us that the negative thoughts that we have about others, about their intentions toward us, about what they want to do to us, about how they want to harm us, all of those thoughts that we have in our head about the other person, they almost always are wrong. And if we can just trust that the other person has a differing perspective, but it doesn't mean that they have a perspective that's against us or that is harm us, we will be able to navigate these conversations better. Especially acknowledging that today is the day after a very, very contentious election. There's lots of opportunities for us on the winning side to say, aha, we won, you lose, or those who are on the losing side to say, oh my God, you must hate us and we hate you. That's all narrative that needs to go away because it's not true. It is not true. So we need to just remind ourselves that people's intention, interpersonal intention towards us is not, almost never is it what we think it is. It may not be great. They may not like you. You may not like them, but their intention to harm you, unlikely. They just want to figure out a way to move forward. So the way to move forward with a critical conversation, I have this little acronym. It's called FRIEND. I came up with it. It's not great. If you can come up with a better acronym, please do. But in the meantime, you're stuck with my FRIEND acronym. So here's what my FRIEND acronym stands for. If you're having a critical conversation, which means you have to have a corrective conversation, or you have to have an important conversation where the stakes are high and emotions are strong and opinions are going to vary, seek out your friend. And your friend is, first, find your due north. What do you need to have accomplished by that conversation? If you're not crystal clear at the end of this conversation, I want to have agreement on X, or I want to have a pathway forward to Y, or even I want to have my due north, maybe I want to have a conversation to normalize the opportunity to have a conversation about something. That also is a critical conversation. So find your due north. And you don't want your due north to be the thing where it's going to be my way or the highway, and that's the due north. A due north is usually what the hope is accomplished by that conversation. The second R, or the first R in friend, is ready your emotions. Get your glass clear. Do not go in if you're red. And the way you do that is you calm yourself, you take deep breaths. The reason why deep breaths work is because our body is flooded with so many hormones that by taking a deep breath, we are slowing our heart rate, we are loosening our constrictive blood vessels, and we're processing those hormones more effectively. You literally move past stress by breathing deeply, or listening to some music, or going for a walk, or picking up a kitten. Or I have a kitten is visiting me for the day, and I have to find kittens are actually pretty great ways to alleviate stress. So do that. I don't know if they're a permanent solution, but they've been working for the last hour and a half. So ready your emotions. Inspect the stories you're telling yourself. Because if you're telling yourself a story about the situation, about that person, it's a story you're telling yourself, and it may or may not be true. So you need to really say, I'm telling myself that this person is doing something to harm me. Are they really? Do I really know that for sure? And if I don't know that for sure, then maybe I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to ask and I'm going to listen. Establish safe ground for both of you to have the conversation. If one of you is feeling unsafe, that's not the right time to have the conversation. You can have a conversation and say, I want to have a conversation about this. These are the things that I want to talk with you about, but I don't want to do it now. I want to wait until we're feeling better, until we're both ready for it. So establish safety in your environment and at the timing of your conversation. Navigate their stories. You've been telling yourself a story. Well, so have they. What is their story? Invariably, when I have told myself stories about somebody doing something, when there's a breakdown in trust, when people start focusing on that person did that to me, the one thing I always ask them is, did they intend to do that to you? Did they intend to hurt you? Was the intention in their action? I get that their action hurt you, but did they intend to hurt you? And 9 times out of 10, actually, I'm going to go 9.9 times out of 10. They don't intend to hurt. The actions do result in hurt, but the intention was not to create harm. And that's where we need to go back to. You didn't intend it. So let's navigate those stories. Let's develop some common ground about how we're going to move forward, how we're going to resolve this, and we're going to document the conversations. So that's your friend. When you have to have a critical conversation, make sure that you go through this process, know what you want, ready your emotions, take care of your stories, create safe ground, give them a time to share their stories, and then figure out where you can come together to work together. Putting all of these pieces together for you. One is to flex to match the behavioral style of others. So when you have to have a conversation with somebody, here's a little tip. We talked about it last week at IAMB conference, the Young Leaders Conference, Young Agents Conference. If you want to know how to communicate with somebody, mimic their body language and their tone of voice. So if somebody's loud and excited, then you can be like, hey, I'm really excited to talk with you. If they're very quiet and they're very reserved, then you say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Keep your hands open because that establishes safety. It shows that you're not protecting yourself. Don't have your arms closed. If they say something that you don't like, do not have your arms closed. Keep your arms open. It means that you're open to understanding them and that you're not battling or preparing for some argument. So pay attention to your body language and match their body language and tone of voice. Be deliberate about the form of feedback that you're giving. And we've already talked about it. Be deliberate about the positive feedback, not just you're doing a great job, but how? How what? What are you observing and why does it matter? And make sure that you are, if you're giving that critical feedback, that you're doing it with positives on either side. And make sure that you're paying attention to both the formal and the informal feedback that you give. Most relationships, especially in the workplace, are damaged not by the formal feedback that's given. That can definitely mess things up, but it's the informal feedback that you're giving all along the way. If it's superficial and insignificant, and then you sit down and you say, you have not been satisfying my objectives, then that informal feedback has not been sufficient either. No one should ever be surprised when they're given corrective feedback. They should see it because it should be given at the time that the thing happens. So making sure that you're deliberate and intentional about your formal and your informal feedback. Recognize the emotions that you have and that they have. And remember, if either of you is emotional, then they are either wanting to flee and hide or they want to punch you in the throat. And you may want to do that too. Not the best time to deliver feedback. So make sure you try to keep clear your red. And finally, take all of this into consideration when you're having a critical conversation. When you're having a corrective conversation or a critical conversation, I really want it to be 10% of the feedback that you give. So if you're really focusing on giving feedback, and this is something you're committed to doing, and I really hope that you do, you want most of the feedback that you're giving on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, in formal reviews and informal reviews. You want this to be positive because you want to reinforce good behaviors. You want to repeat good behaviors. And when you say you're doing this really well, and if you master this thing, you'll do this even better, you've got somebody who's motivated and excited about their own growth. But if all you say is, you're not doing this thing right, my bucket has a hole in it. And I don't know how anybody doesn't get a hole in it when that feedback is not given correctly. But it can be done really well. And you don't have to remember all the acronyms. If you just remember certain things, like giving positive feedback to the people that are performing really well, in addition to those that need corrective feedback. Make sure that when you give corrective feedback, that it's anchored and that you're giving it at a time and a place where everybody's ready for it, everybody's prepared for it and knows how they want to move forward. And when you're in that moment, listen, be open with your body, be open with your heart when you're having that conversation, because you may learn something as well. And when you're doing all of these things, the person who has to do all of the work is you, because we can't change others. All we can do is be our best selves and hope that that will help inspire others to be good at what they do. So I know you all can do it, and I saw it just last week, people practicing. It feels awkward at first, but when you get used to it, you will see it flourishing all around you. You will see the opportunities, and I'm really excited to see. I want feedback from you. I'm asking for feedback. Give it a try and see. Try the 10-penny challenge. Let's see if that makes it a different work environment. Oh, and I want to note one thing. A lot of people say things like, I've never done anything like this. And all of a sudden you want me to go around saying nice things to people all the time. They're going to be like, what's wrong with you? Well, that may be, although usually when you just give positive feedback to people, they're just like, that felt great. Thank you. And if they're saying like, why are you being so nice to me? Maybe it's because maybe you haven't been as nice as you should have been. And now's an opportunity to change that. But it's also okay to say, as I'm learning and growing, I want to figure out better ways to communicate. And I see the power and the importance of positive feedback. And it's something I really want to model and do regularly for the rest of my career. This is something that I want to develop and incorporate as part of my leadership style going forward. And people will say, all right. And you may also find them modeling it themselves. And hopefully they're going to be saying and a lot instead of but. So with that, I just would love to see if there's any questions, any thoughts that people have, any difficult situations that you have that you'd like to share. I'm going to ask if Jess, you're there, if you can help me go through some of those questions.
Claudia, I know the one question we had earlier on was, what do you do about the individual who needs constant feedback? And the comment with that was, it's exhausting. So how do you deal with somebody who needs that constant positive feedback?
Back throughout their entire schooling and in their families, they go directly into the work environment and all of a sudden they don't get any positive feedback. And that can be a shock. What I would say to you is give them that feedback. And also you can give them the feedback that says, hey, you're doing such a great job. And I know you keep checking in with me on these 3 things. I want to reassure you, you are doing everything that I'm asking you to do. So keep doing it. Develop some confidence. Know that you're doing a good job, because I promise If there are things that we can help you to be even better at, we'll have that conversation. A lot of that need for constant feedback is because their buckets are draining faster than the feedback is going in. So it's not just feedback, but reassuring them. And again, as parents, for those of you who are out there who are parents, um, we give positive feedback to our children because we know it develops healthy people. We know it develops their esteem, their confidence, their ability to navigate conflict, their resilience. That's, if they're asking for that, it's because they need that in this new domain that they're in at work. So I think I would just have patience and try to give feedback around their need for feedback as a reassurance to them that they're okay and they're on the right track, and give them specifics.
And then one of the other questions is, how do you handle someone who always feels attacked when you want to give feedback or discuss processes with them?
That's a very good question. And I think recognizing that some of us, when we're in emotional states, or if we have an inner self dialogue that tells us we're not safe or people don't value us, they will display that. And what I think you can do is, if it were me, I would start by planting the positive feedback, planting the positive feedback, and then saying, when we have these conversations about improvement, I get the feeling that you feel like you're being attacked, but you're doing all of these great things. This is just going to help you be better. I did say but. I noticed that I said but. And you're doing all of these great things, and this is just going to make you better. So this is not a criticism. This is just a way to help develop you. So I think if everything feels like an attack, it maybe is because they're not getting enough positive in the first place to settle down, so that their bucket isn't emptying as much as possible. There are people who have inner dialogues that are just not being kind to them regularly. Address that. Remind them that you think positively of them, and that you're really excited about their development and their growth and the contribution that they make regularly. You will see that person change. I promise you, you will see that person change.
I'm so glad you caught yourself saying but, because I feel like I'm going to be extra sensitive to that as I speak throughout the day. I think we have time for one more question. And for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, we will address them. I'll follow up with you separately. But the last question, I think it's a really good one, is how do you give constructive feedback up, meaning to your supervisor or to your leader?
That's always scary, right? So that always bears risk. So I think we do the same thing. I think you give positive feedback. The way you included me in that was really, I'm just so grateful, because it means that I'm going to develop better in my role, and I love working here, and I'm excited about it. And I'd love the opportunity to do that more. You asked me to do these things, and I'm happy to do them all, and I'm working on processing them. And it would be helpful to me if maybe we could follow up on those outstanding things more frequently, to make sure that I'm not missing anything and that we're working collaboratively as a team. It works. It's when you want to give, really, if your issue, and I'm example of this. I'm the CEO of my company. I have a lot of people that work with me, and I have some behavioral characteristics that are terrible. I break promises, and the way I break promises is I say yes to everything because I want to help everybody, and yet I do not have the organizational skills to remember the promises that I've made. And so I get feedback, and it sounds like this: Claudia, you are wonderful at what you do, the way you keep the company going, and everybody is engaged. None of us would ever want to work anywhere else. I'm very proud that I've had no turnover in 15 years, and I'm very proud of that. And they will say that, and they will say, and we need to help you figure out how to keep your promises better. And you got involved in that situation, and that made it more confusing for everybody. You don't need to be involved in that conversation. So it's, again, like, they're nice. They say nice things. They remind me that they're happy and they're engaged and they would never want to be anywhere else. And I'm doing some things that I need to try and work on, and they're there to help me work on them. So that's how I take it.
Great, Claudia. I just wanted to share one final comment. There's lots of great feedback coming in, but the one comment was that they really enjoyed your program and now they're moving their penny on with that positive comment. So something stuck today. So I love that.
Yay. Yay, and pennies. I mean, I'll take it. If that's what you remember, I'm good with that. That works.
Well, thank you again for joining us today, and thank you all for joining us. Again, a lot of great feedback. Keep your eye out. We are going to be sharing the recording as well as the slide deck. I know a couple people had asked to go back to a few slides, so you will be getting that. And we appreciate you and hope to see you in a future webinar. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Stay in touch.